with Anna Berkelmans, and we're gonna talk about autoimmune disease, and this is part of this chronic inflammation series. So without, I guess, Anna, as you see questions and stuff in the forum, you can bop in. We're also gonna release this as a podcast, so if you miss it on the Facebook Live, you can hear it on the podcast. And there's a lot to talk about with allergies and autoimmune and asthma, and I really just wanted to start on this conversation with autoimmune with like what are some of the core symptoms, because often what happens, I think, Anna, by the time people start talking to you in whether they do a free body goals session at yogahealer.com/body-goals, and they're talking to you, like often they're at a point where they actually have a diagnosis, what I put in air quotes as scary diagnosis, because if you have irritable bowel disease or type 1 diabetes or lupus or Hashimoto's or MS or celiac or Sjogren's or Graves or Addison's or RA, you're at that point where it's no fun to get that diagnosis. And chances are, when you then go back and say, well, what were the symptoms of autoimmune, often there's a history where you're like, oh, actually, there were signs and symptoms often for a while, and then often there was either a stressful event or there was a lot of stress either in utero or in early childhood, not always, or there was a PTSD type of experience that set off the transformation from symptoms of autoimmune into a scary diagnosis, into an air quote scary diagnosis. So what I wanted to do in this session, and I'm gonna talk kind of a mile a minute and try to download my brain into all your brains, and then Anna will interject questions after I talk for a little bit. Is what I wanna do is I want for both people who have the scary diagnosis or have a friend or have a child or have a sister or mother or brother that has a scary diagnosis, to be able to understand what's going on in terms of the inflammatory load or the allostatic load on the body. But I also want people that are in the symptoms of autoimmune, where there's symptoms without a diagnosis, to be able to potentially prevent going down the path of having a scary diagnosis. So in Ayurvedic medicine, which that's my background for those who don't know me, I'm Kate Stillman. I've been at Yoga Healer, the helm of Yoga Healer since 2001. I wrote Body Thrive in 2015, and we now have a coaching company, and we basically try to coach people at this point out of inflammation. It seems to be my dharma and my job as an Ayurvedic medicine practitioner and as a yogi at this point, to help everyone understand what is reversible, what's diet and lifestyle driven. So just statistically here, I'm just gonna go through this. Chronic inflammatory diseases, autoimmune is in here, but it doesn't even make the big six list of stroke, chronic respiratory diseases, heart disorders, cancer, obesity, and diabetes are all chronic inflammatory diseases. So are the 80 plus listed autoimmune diseases, of which I only listed the top 10. So there's plenty of havoc being wreaked by chronic inflammation. And part of the deal with chronic inflammation, if we look at the rise of chronic inflammation over time, is that it follows. Here's like chronic disease in America over time. This is a graph that's showing like 1935, we're at 7.5%. By the time we get to 2020, this is disease. This isn't symptomology, this is disease. This is like, quote unquote, the scary diagnosis that we were talking about before with the cancer and the strokes and the respiratory diseases, that we're at 60% by 2020. Unfortunately, this number hasn't taken a dip since COVID. It's gone up. One of the things that I think is really important to notice while we're talking about what happened between early 1900s and current day is we have the invention of vegetable oil happening right in 1907, and that starts to get traction post World War II. So right around 1940. We have skyrocketing consumption following the exact same trajectory, sugar consumption following the exact same trajectory as chronic disease. Now, part of the issue is that when we go to the doctor, our healthcare system, our modern healthcare system, is set up to deal with acute inflammation, accidents, and injuries. It's not set up to deal with diet and lifestyle diseases, of which chronic inflammatory diseases are now. It's like the proof is in. We have enough scientific literature that connects chronic inflammation with diet and lifestyle. And I know all of those of you out there who are in holistic health, all you wellness pros that are listening in, maybe many of you are in our YHC program for wellness pros. You guys have known this all along, and you're like, we can't fix this stuff with a pill. We can't fix this stuff with a surgery. We have to get to the level of diet and lifestyle if we're truly going to prevent. And that's really what brings us, into this conversation today, is like exactly what's going on. So I am going to just read through the symptoms of inflammation, just so that we understand, with particular to autoimmune disease, what are these symptoms. Especially for the people who are just listening, this will be helpful. And then we'll also put in the chat and in the show notes, we have a Body Goals Crash Course ebook that has this really handy dandy page called Circle the Symptoms of Inflammation. I know for me, this is something I check all the time because I fall under a Pitta type, fiery type workaholic. Like that's my MO. Like, and I have to really watch my symptoms of inflammation because I don't want to all of a sudden end up with Hashimoto's thyroiditis or something scary like that. So again, I just really encourage everyone, print the Body Goals Crash Course workbook, schedule a session with Anna. Some of you will actually choose to actually take our Body Goals Crash Course, and we'll give you a heck of a deal on that because it's just super helpful to see where you stand with inflammation. I would say it's like the best thing you can do is to get a read on it and then to keep getting a read on where you're at with inflammation. Okay, symptoms. And this is the problem, you guys, is before it gets into differentiated diseases, you have this like amorphous group of symptoms that seem somewhat unrelated, some of which you may have already talked to your healthcare provider about, your doctor about, your holistic practitioners about. Okay, so drum roll. Symptoms of autoimmune fatigue. So you're just tired. And I would say sometimes you don't know how tired you are, especially if you're sugarcoating that. Or coffee coating that like sometimes we just don't know how tired we really are. And this is where things can catch up with people because we have so many amazing stimulants in this day and age. Coffee is everywhere. It's everywhere. And if you're in India, chai is everywhere, right? If you're in Japan, like green tea is everywhere. So what we have to get a sense of is like, who am I without caffeine? How tired is my endocrine system? How tired are my adrenal glands? Okay, achy muscles. So this is a deep one, especially with not too much exertion where you're like, I'm achier than I should be. Anyone who's had like a really bad flu, you know what that achy muscle feeling feels like. So when that starts to become more normal, that's a sign that you're going towards autoimmune. Swelling and rashes. So swelling can be local, but it can also be regional. It can also just be in general, where you're puffy, where your lymph system is challenged because there's a lot of inflammation. And I'm going to get into the level of like how the inflammation is releasing in the body in a moment. Trouble concentrating. I'm going to skip low-grade fever and go right to trouble concentrating. We see this a lot with brain fog. We see this a lot with people who will blame it on aging. Like all of a sudden I can't concentrate as long and my mental recall isn't as strong. So what we want to start to associate these are signs of chronic inflammation. These are also the symptoms that show up before in an autoimmune diagnosis. Numbness or tingling in the hands or the feet. The numbness, it can be, especially if you're not barefoot that much. I so encourage people to be barefoot and walk around so you have a lot of awareness of your feet. But just know that is also a symptom. Hair loss, I saw that pop up on the forum today, hair loss on our Body Thrive forum. And it's like, we want to be able to know that if like we start losing hair, we've got to check all the other signs and symptoms of inflammation and see what's going on there. Because no, we shouldn't just experience hair loss. And then skin rashes. So in the last talk we did, I've done 2 prior talks in the series, one on asthma and one on allergies. And I got a lot into the skin rashes, and that ties into swelling and redness, often for many people. Right now, just to understand that ectopic dermatitis is one of the signs that your immune system is failing. That is a sign of chronic inflammation, and it's super common, particularly with children and with teens. So these are signs that we want to be able to identify. What you're not going to see, what's interesting is like what you don't see on this list is weight gain. And I took this list off Healthline. I would be more concerned if I was female with autoimmune and was gaining weight. So females have more autoimmune diseases more than males. Minorities, and like in the United States, women of color have much higher rates of autoimmune. And there are correlations with weight gain and with obesity. So those are all things we want to just have on the radar. Like, I'm so into the body acceptance movement because I feel like it took me about 45 years to accept my body. And I get that, like, to like really freaking love my body and my cells and like my shape and like all of me. And so yes, body acceptance. But I find what we don't want to do is accept symptoms of inflammation. And so sometimes that does mean that we have to be super aware of what inflammation and weight and how those things are correlated. So I'm going to get into that in a minute. I'm going to get into like what needs to happen in our fat cells in order to have a healthy immune system. Because right now, according to modern science, according to the scientific literature, the adipose tissue, which is the fat tissue of the body, has been actually reclassified as an endocrine organ. And if we look at the diseases of chronic inflammation, we're going to see like a lot of these are happening in the endocrine glands. So we have to get really interested in, well, wait, what does the endocrine system do? Has something to do with hormones, right? Has something to do with hormones do what? What are the neurotransmitters? Don't those have something to do with the endocrine system? So this is a way that the body's communicating between your brain, the pineal gland and pituitary gland, and the messages those are sending to the other glands of the body so that those glands can regulate organs and systems. So they're the big communicators. That's how I think of the endocrine system, is the big communicators of the body. And if we understand that the adipose tissue, the fat tissue of the body, is an endocrine system, right? Then we have to understand that, like, okay, the stakes are high if we're carrying too much weight. And if we're gaining, if we've got weight creep, and we're next week going to go 100% into weight creep on my next Facebook Live. So if you have weight creep or you know people with weight creep, listen in. And all weight creep is your weight is slowly creeping up. That's all that means. Okay, so symptoms. I break symptoms into body, into mind, and into soul. So when I look at inflammation, knowing that the symptoms of autoimmune and that autoimmune is lodged in chronic inflammation, I want to know all the different symptoms of inflammation. So I really recommend to print the worksheet and see all the other ones that are in there, because there's just a lot. There's a lot on the emotional side. I'm just going to blow up this side, because in body type medicine, so Ayurvedic medicine is a body type medicine. Most indigenous medicines I find had a real strong body type awareness. So even the way, if you think about like how Native Americans were named or named themselves, is they name themselves often with a connection to an animal or a connection to an element. And we find that this is true cross-culturally, that like our human ancestors understood that people had different body types. Where this is helpful with autoimmune is you want to know, again, autoimmune is a chronic inflammatory disease. All 80 plus autoimmune diseases, some sites put it at 120 autoimmune diseases. There's a lot of autoimmune diseases. What we want to see is like, what is your emotional inflammatory type, and how can you start to monitor yourself so that you can avoid having a scary diagnosis, or if you already have a scary diagnosis, so that you can start to change your habits, and we'll get into what those habit changes are in a moment, and start to monitor how you're doing by your emotions, by what emotions you experience. What do you wake up feeling? What do you feel mid-morning? What do you feel midday? How do you feel in the middle of the afternoon? How do you feel around dinner time? How do you feel in the evening? How do you feel when you go to bed? You can start to monitor your emotions for inflammation. So the different body types, the lighter types, the people that are more of our wind types, our airier, fairier types, who tend towards lightness. And you can be overweight in any body type, but it's what were you like more as a kid or as a teenager, perhaps? Although now with kids and teens being overweight, it's harder and harder to tell what is underneath it all. In terms of like personality, people that have more vata or wind in their type, the lighter types, they'll naturally be excited. They'll naturally be fun to be around, lighthearted, quick to remember, quick to forget, quick to forgive. And those are all wind types. But with the emotions of inflammation, wind types get overwhelmed. That lightness just gets crushed by the weight and the heaviness of the world, by the chronic stress of the world. I have found, especially since COVID, that these types like should not be looking at the news. Like they get overwhelmed by bad news. They get overwhelmed by global problems, overwhelmed by problems they can't solve. And because so much of that has exacerbated in the last couple of years, and because the media has been, well, I won't get into that. You all know how the media has been. It's easy for any body type to feel overwhelmed. And what we need to correlate is that overwhelm is an emotion of inflammation. And if we entertain that emotion, meaning we don't do something to change our emotional state, what can happen is that can turn the tide of a symptom of autoimmune into a disease of autoimmune. So we all body types need to be aware of that overwhelm emotion, but particularly if you're on the lighter, more enthusiastic side. Fiery types who are intense and focused and tend to be able to digest a lot, the emotion of inflammation is irritation. So if you feel irritated a lot, frustrated a lot, if you're pissed off a lot at yourself and everybody else, that's an emotion of inflammation. You've got to use that as an identifier that, okay, I got to change something because that means I'm not healthy. What we know about emotional inflammation is it generates physical inflammation. So there's not really much difference between emotional inflammation and physical inflammation at the level of the tissue of your body. And that's where things go wrong, is at the physical level of tissue. So changing our emotional state has become a very important project. All right, Kapha types are the heavier types, the water, earth type, the denser types, the more stable, sturdy, dependable types. Often can just feel blah, feel complacent, feel unmotivated to change anything, feel like it's too hard. They lack willpower often, lack the get her done, the get up and go. And so if you notice like, oh, I wasn't always this way, but I'm feeling increasingly unmotivated, then that again is a sign of emotional inflammation. What I want to point to at the bottom of this slide, and anyone who's listening on the podcast will include the slide deck in it so you can see the pretty pictures because it is helpful to put these images into your brain. The problem with negative emotions is that they create something called negative bias or negativity bias. This is a term that comes from psychology. And it's a term that's actually also used in allopathic medicine. And negative bias, to me, it's like one of the scariest things about negative bias or negativity bias is that it decreases your neuroplasticity. So it makes you less able to learn something new. So that whole thing about like you can't teach an old dog a new trick, this is really true with negative bias. We become less capable of diet and lifestyle changes. Now, if chronic inflammation, which we've already like gone over, like, oh my gosh, vegetable oil, it's in everything. Oh my gosh, sugar, it seems to be in everything. Like, oh my gosh, there's chronic disease everywhere. All the diseases seem to be chronic inflammatory diseases. Like, I'm totally overwhelmed. I've got emotions of inflammation and I have negative bias. I'm less able to change diet and lifestyle. And this is one of the things we have found so again and again and again, so tried and true over the last 20 years at Yoga Healer, is that the best way to overcome negative bias is to be with people with positive bias. That is really the number one way that we have helped people uproot chronic inflammation. We've helped people with autoimmune diseases and autoimmune symptoms that haven't yet become diseases, but they're on track for that, and it might also have a genetic correlation, actually turn the tide. And that's really important to know. And I just want to hone in on this, because if you're surrounded by people with negative bias and you have negative bias and you have one of these 3 patterns of emotions of inflammation, like, I pray for you and good luck. But it's going to be way harder to reverse that situation until you get around people that are living the lifestyle of positive stressors and positive bias. And that's what I'll get into in just a minute. I'm almost done with the gloom and doom. Anna, do you need to interrupt me at all?
We have some questions. Do you want to take those now?
You go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So from Sherry Rose about allergy relief. So she is just asking about fibromyalgia and what tips we can give to her. So it's interesting honing in on the specific classification of the chronic inflammation. And yeah.
So this is the deal. I'm not going to get into how and I don't even have fibromyalgia on this list of psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, lupus, type 1 diabetes, like all those ones I read before. But that's another super common one, because what I would rather we understand today is what is the same. Not because what Western medicine, what allopathic medicine, allo means other. So allo's looking versus natural medicine, holistic medicine, homeopathic, allopathic versus homeopathic. And I'm not really trying to home in what homeopathic in terms of like the little pills in the bottle mean, but just the concept of allostasis versus homeostasis is really important to understand. So allostasis is when allo means other, homeo means the same or self. So with autoimmune disease, there's always allostasis. There's so much other, there's so much confusion particularly within the endocrine system, that's largely driven by chronic inflammation that's moving through the blood and getting, part of the reason it's moving through the blood has to do with the fat cells, which we'll get to in just a minute. But there's so much inflammation overload in the physiology that the immune system is just cleaning house. Now, which way does your ship go down? Does it go down to fibromyalgia? Does it go down with MS? Does it go down with type 1 diabetes? Does it go down with celiacs, IBD, psoriasis, RA, juvenile RA, Graves, Addison? There's 80, at least 80 differentiations of how does your ship go down. What do all 80 have in common, and why do you care? And to me, this is where it gets so fascinating, because like, I really care that people are healthy. Like, I really want everyone to feel good. I really do. I really believe it's your birthright. So go ahead.
Yeah, the other 2 questions relate to this is like, can autoimmune diseases, particularly rheumatoid arthritis, be completely cured? And the second one was like, what are our success stories?
Yeah. Okay, great. I'll file those in. So we have all this differentiation of disease. That's allostasis, and all autoimmune disease has at the root chronic inflammation. So what we really want to ask ourselves is, how do I uproot chronic inflammation? How do I get to the bottom of chronic inflammation? What's my emotional inflammation pattern? How many symptoms of inflammation do I have in my body? How many symptoms do I have in my mind? And how many do I have in my soul? Which for some of you, like the soul path, like, what do I mean? Lack of drive, lack of direction, complacency, hopelessness, overwhelm, unclear direction, disconnect from meaning in your life, feeling trapped in consumerism or feeling trapped in the world of time. And this is what's so heartening about when you do have a scary diagnosis, say you have RA, and say you have Hashimoto's or MS, right? Is there can be this feeling that like there's nothing I can really do but take medication and hope for the best. What we want to help you understand is like, wait, hold on. Let's back up here a second. Didn't we just go through that this is a new phenomenon, right? That we didn't have these chronic diseases not so long ago. I'm trying to find that slide. So if we look again, right now, 3 out of 5 people are dying from chronic disease, but in 1935, only 7.5% of the population had chronic disease. What changed? What are we doing different? Because if autoimmune is falling under chronic disease, then these are the questions we really want to ask. Like, what is off in my diet? What is off in my lifestyle, including my mindset, including my soul path, that's actually triggering the disease? Because if I'm working a job I don't like and I'm in a relationship I don't like, and those are negative bias, those are negative stressors. Emotional inflammation generates physical inflammation. So we want to be willing to look at all levels in terms of what's going on. So let's go next into, well, actually, I'll just bring this up. This is diseases linked to inflammation. And what I want to show you, this is out of Harvard Med School. So we've got diseases, you can see it affecting every different part of the body, whether it's brain, spinal cord, lungs, thyroid, pancreas, kidneys, joints, immune system. And what I want you to see under immune system, autoimmune disorders. This is out of Harvard Medical School. Autoimmune disorders are under immune system, which are under diseases of chronic inflammation. And if you get anything from today, I want you to think, I'm not different. MS isn't that different than lupus, that different from Hashimoto's, that different from IBD. What I want us to say is, like, where are my symptoms? Where can I lower my allostatic load? So allopathic disease has allostatic load, other than stasis, other than being at home in the self. And that's what inflammation generates, is it generates this confusion within the physiology. And why is there confusion in the physiology? It's usually because things are out of rhythm. So what do we find? And now to that, actually, well, we can do this in two ways. I'll go to a bit of, like, what do we find? We find when people line up, you'll find this in the Body Goals Crash Course workbook, you guys, which we're giving to you for free today because I'm feeling quite generous. And because I want you to go through it and then talk to Anna about it. Because if you do have chronic inflammation, we can help you, and you need help because you don't want to have a chronic inflammatory disease. It's way more expensive to deal with that than it is to get yourself the help that you need. On this page within the workbook is the circadian rhythm wheel, and there's another page that's which habits are you missing. So these are the circadian rhythm habits. The circadian rhythm habits, which I wrote a book on years ago called Body Thrive. The circadian rhythm habits are the anti-inflammatory habits. So what you want to identify on your circadian rhythm wheel is, like, which habits am I violating? Like, which habits, where am I love the word sin. From the Christian tradition, it means to miss the mark. Where am I missing the mark? Where am I missing the habits that my body needs to thrive? Where am I missing the habits, and therefore my body's creating chronic inflammation? And what that does is it puts you back in the driver's seat. So what do we find? I mean, we find that, like, people that do our Body Thrive course for a year, people that are in our Living Ayurveda course, which is where a lot of people with autoimmune diseases, we have them in our Living Ayurveda course. What we find, I would say, the first 6 months, it's a bit of a come to Jesus experience. It's a bit of a day of reckoning, because often the habits are out of whack, and they're deeply out of whack, and there's adrenaline addiction, and it's hard to wind down at night, and it's hard to get up in the morning, and there's lots of Band-Aids and crutches in their lifestyle. But they're in a supportive environment, and they're there to heal, and they're there to understand cause and effect, and they're there to understand how the imbalances developed over time, because diet and lifestyle diseases do not happen overnight. Unfortunately, because children are now being born, babies are now being born with chronic inflammation, a lot of kids are starting from behind. We have some degeneration happening as a species. And that's super sad. But it's also, I'd like to deal with reality. And if this is the reality that we're in, then it's just good to simply know. What we also find is that when people have gotten to the point of having a scary diagnosis, of already having an autoimmune disease, what we often find is that it takes a little while. It depends where the person is on their path too, because sometimes we get people who are already halfway through a healing journey and they're coming with us to finish the process. And other people are brand new into okay, I have a scary diagnosis. I know that chronic inflammation is at the root of autoimmune disease. I know it's diet and lifestyle driven in part. I know that it's stress driven in part. And I know that, parts of my health history are stressful. But there's often a lot of layers underneath the chronic allostatic load. There's often a lot of layers under the chronic stress. There's often a lot of layers under the diet and lifestyle that'll really, really work for the individual's physiology. So I know that's not as easy an answer of like, just take these 2 pills and it'll mitigate your symptoms. But what we find is that the healing journey is so rewarding in ways that are so completely unpredictable. Like, it's a path that you get to understand your soul journey, you get to understand your unique physiology, you get to understand your constitutional type and how to take better care of yourself. So what we find is that on the other end of it are people completely healed? No, some are. Yes, some are. I mean, we've had people reverse, put MS in remission. We have had people put IBD in remission, psoriasis in remission, Hashimoto's in remission. Like, yes. But I don't go saying like this course will cure you. No. It will cure your habits of chronic inflammation. I will guarantee that if you hang out with us for long enough. All right, we lost Anna. I hope you guys still see me and have got me here. Okay, so next, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with chronic inflammation. So I'm going to make the screen a little bit bigger just so I can see it. Okay, so what I want you to notice first off is chronic inflammation, it affects your adaptive immunity. So you have an adaptive immune system and you have an innate immune system. So the way that we look at immune system is in 2 parts. The part that's supposed to adapt to the changing environment, adapt to new viruses that are coming hot on the market into human beings. We want to be able to adapt to the changing seasons, including the changes in pollen and the changes in the, basically in the flora outside. So our adaptive immunity starts to become sacrificed because we have an ongoing stimulus of inflammation that's happening from inside the physiology. So just running your day-to-day business, like business of keeping your body running, new cells turning over, old cells becoming digested, the body functioning as the body's designed to function, that starts to get sacrificed right off the bat. And this is what starts to create more and more of a problem is your immune cells become recruited for just like business as usual activities. And then you actually, through the process of the body recruiting immune cells to deal with the chronic inflammation that's circulating in the blood, you end up secreting more inflammatory mediators from various immune cells. So now your immune system is being used for day-to-day activities that aren't actually helping you adapt to your environment. They're just dealing with a cleanup. It's like there's like a chemical waste spill inside every day, and it's just cleaning up. So your innate immunity falls, your adaptive immunity falls. And that's part of the reason we see asthma, allergies. That's why we see those as like those early warning signs that the immune system is not working properly. It's not working as designed. So the problem is this whole ongoing stimulus creates this ongoing feedback loop where inflammation builds inflammation. And it induces the various inflammatory associated disorders and diseases. So I hope this is helpful. I know this was helpful for me to see like, oh, it's a feedback loop. So if our diet's off, remember before how we said like, oh shoot, this little vegetable oil and sugar consumption. Well, you could also put on this glycosates, which is in Roundup, which is in our food supply now. I guess everybody's got it in their bodies. And that's just crops grown with glyphosate, that those numbers also skyrocket with chronic disease. And that's more recent. That's not as long as from the 1940s. Obviously, like having more wheat in your diet or hybridized grains, all of this is a huge contributor to the problem. Why is the body responding? But I wanted to talk about 2 more things in this. And one is fat cells, and the other is apoptosis, and they're directly related. So if we can understand this, that we're either digesting food on a cellular level, or we're digesting toxins, waste, or pathogens, and you can include in this inflammation, or we're digesting inflammation. So that's on the right side of this picture, this two digestive operating systems at the cellular and intercellular level, that we're either doing one or the other, that they're mutually exclusive. Meaning, if we're eating too frequently, we're going to be digesting food, which means our cells are constantly digesting the food particles. If we're allowing a long enough fasting time, our cells will start to be able to digest bacteria and viruses, pathogens, mutations, and even defective proteins or defective mitochondria within cells. What happens when we're actually in autophagy, and that's auto means self, phagy means to eat. When we're in autophagy, for long enough, what happens is apoptosis, and this is where cells actually that are not healthy cells, they will actually combust. They will break down into what are called apoptotic bodies. And then those apoptotic bodies will be upcycled. And this is how our physiology is designed. Our physiology is designed to be able to go into fasting mode. I find preferably within every 24-hour period, we want hours of time in autophagy. And next month, we'll be launching an intermittent fasting challenge. I'm super excited about that. And we understand a lot about metabolic flexibility and how women need to fast potentially differently from men, according to their cycles, et cetera. But we're really going to get into like, how do you get deeper into autophagy in order to digest chronic inflammation? All right. So when you're in autophagy, what happens? Like, why is it super effective? Why does it work? Well, on this slide, what you can see is there's a left side and there's a right side. So on the left side, this is when your fat cells are in autophagy. So they're actually in circulation, because if you don't eat for long enough and it's at least 13 hours of no calories, no sip of wine, no cream in the coffee, what happens is your body starts to go into autophagy. It starts to digest what's in the cells. It digests what's in the blood as well. So if you're always have a few calories in your bloodstream, if you're a snacker, what happens is that you're in the digestive system where you're constantly digesting food particles, even if it's like just having, Coca-Cola. Some people who look at this say even non-nutrient sweeteners will disrupt autophagy. The sweet taste in non-nutrient sweeteners will disrupt autophagy. So the more interested we are in dumping chronic inflammation, we get super interested in autophagy, which means our fat cells are now being required to release triglycerides back into the bloodstream. So our fat cells shrink. They are in a pulsation and they get their shrink on. They get smaller. This is super important, because what I want you to see down here is that when the fat cells are in that pulsation, they're shrinking because they're releasing energy back into the bloodstream, as you release adiponectin, ketones, and growth hormone. Your stem cells are able to optimize, and then you get all these benefits. One of the benefits is genetic expression. So a lot of people are like, oh, wait, my autoimmune disease, it has a genetic component. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you decrease mutation, right, and you increase genetic expression, meaning your genes are optimizing as they're replicating, game on, all good. That's what we want. We want our fat cells in circulation, which means we need to fast for long enough. So other components, and you're going to see like, oh, wait, these are the opposite. These are the opposite things that happen to the symptoms of chronic inflammation. Remember how the symptoms of chronic inflammation, there's memory issues, there's cellular regeneration issues, and there's weight gain. So you see the opposite when the fat cells are in circulation. You see lean muscle, you see increase in cognitive function, increase in memory, increase in cellular regeneration, meaning you have more stem cells in production, an increase in genetic expression. So you have less genetic mutation. Yay, win-win. There's something we can do to feel better, get our fat cells into circulation. Out of circulation, meaning there's always food particles circulating in the blood because we're not fasting for, at least we're not, I really like the 16-8 where autophagy starts at 13 hours after your last sweet taste or last calories have hit your lips. And you get 3 hours minimum of autophagy a day, then that's really good. But if we're getting less than that, what happens is our fat cells are out of circulation, but not really. It means that they're actually, and this is where it gets cray-cray, they're releasing pro-inflammatory hormones. So adipokines, chemokines, cytokines, these are all pro-inflammatory markers that are released from the fat cells into the bloodstream. Now, fat cells, they're not just on your belly, they're not just in your thighs, not just in your boobs or your brain. Fat cells are everywhere in your body, right? They're with your lean muscle tissue. So these, and now you're thinking like, oh wait, this is starting to make a ton of sense. No wonder my muscles ache if my fat cells are releasing pro-inflammatory markers, are releasing basically inflammation into the blood that then attracts the immune system, which then generates more inflammation. And now I'm on this inflammation roller coaster. So what happens with inflammation? We've already gone over that: autoimmune disease, obesity, cancer, cardiovascular disease. All right. So fasting versus overeating is really, really important. Overeating, also eating too frequently. And this is huge. What we find is that in all of our courses now, it's like we get people into a good fasting rhythm so that they can repair their DNA. And if you look at this, you can see on the overeating or eating too frequently side, you don't just have insulin resistance, right? And the diabetics are obviously on the severe end of that stick, but you also have cognitive complacency, meaning you can't learn as easily. If you go down to, you'll see oxidative damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, and impaired DNA, excitatory imbalance of inflammation. And this is really, really important to see, is that your vulnerability to disease is dramatically increasing. So it's not about accepting your body or not accepting your body. It's not about the body acceptance movement. It's about, am I fasting long enough so that my DNA doesn't go haywire and mutate, so I don't end up with a disease that was actually optional, a disease that was actually diet and lifestyle driven. All right, we lost Anna. I think she had somewhere else she needed to be. In any case, I hope this has been super useful. I'm gonna go and see if there's any questions on the forum. I believe I can see you guys there. Let's see. No, I can't. Riza, if there's any and you want to just put them in our allergy relief on the forum, that's fine. Otherwise, you guys, you can always email help@yogahealer.com, and then I will get your questions and I can answer your questions in a future Facebook Live. What I want to make sure that you have is the Body Goals Crash Course ebook, and we'll put those links in the chat to here, and also a link to a free Body Goals session so that you can talk to Anna directly and go through the workbook. It's super helpful to do. And if there's a way, if you do have a chronic inflammatory disease, if you do have an autoimmune disease, or if you have symptoms that are on the autoimmune spectrum, that we can talk with you and really help you reverse what's going on. Because I think the most exciting thing about understanding autoimmune is that there's so much that you can do to help yourself. All right, I hope this has been useful. It's Kate@yogahealer.com. If you have any questions, just send an email to help@yogahealer.com and we can hook you up. Namaste and have a great day.